Hey folks, welcome to an episode of Sound Decisions here on Passion for Sound. I was recently fortunate enough to get a second chance to interview Zach and Bevin from ZMF or ZMF Headphones, and it was specifically in the lead up to the release of their brand new flagship Atrium headphone. This interview covers more ground than just the Atrium, but of course we will talk about some of what went into the Atrium, why the decision was made to have the Atrium sit alongside the Verite open. A lot of those sorts of discussions do happen here, but so much else as well that makes this interview much more about what goes into designing a headphone, the thought processes that Zach looks at and that Bevin look at when they're coming up with new models. There's even a couple of bits of information about new models coming, so there's lots of different stuff to cover. If you're not specifically interested in the Atrium headphone, this may still be of interest to you if you're interested in headphone design in general and or other ZMF models coming out in the future. As always, because this was recorded on Zoom, the audio and video quality isn't up to the normal standard. There was also a bit of a glitch halfway through and Zach had to restart one of his answers, but hopefully you'll still find this an enjoyable and informative video to watch. One final point is that if you want to jump to a specific question or topic, do check out the chapter markers. I've clearly explained what each section covers in terms of the content, so feel free to jump around and pick and choose what you listen to. But for now, without any further delay, let's jump into my second interview with Zach and Bevin from ZMF Headphones. Bevin and Zach, thank you for joining me again on Passion for Sound here. Really great to have you back on. And obviously with an exciting purpose for today's video, we chatted about maybe doing a bit of a deep dive interview about headphone design, but then along comes a perfect example of a deep dive into headphone design in your brand new ZMF or ZMF Atrium. So I think the obvious place to start is tell us about the genesis of the Atrium. Where did it come from in terms of what your vision for it was and kind of what goals you had for it, as opposed to, obviously we've got the Verite Open's been around for ages now, relative to a brand new headphone. So what was the vision to come up with something new and different in the Atrium?
So actually like 4 or 5 years ago, or no, I was 2015 when I was, finishing the design of the Auteur Icon, Atticus and all that stuff. The biocellulose driver and the TPE driver were the first two drivers that we came out with for the dynamic headphones. And so what ended up, becoming the Atticus Icon that got released in 2016, I had already spent like 2 years on those drivers and came out with them. And it's just like anything, after you've lived with something for 6-7 years, the biocellulose driver, I kind of just got itching to, there are things about the Auteur and Icon I thought I could do better. And, our lineup having 6 headphones in it, it started with me just wanting to redo the driver and make it as good as it can be. And that's why we're coming out with not only the Atrium, but also the Auteur Classic, which will replace the Auteur because, I ended up making the driver a bunch of times over again. And I realized not only could I make the same driver better, but I could also make the driver differently, which would be what would become the Atrium. And then the same driver a little bit better is becoming what the Auteur Classic will be.
Right, okay. So without giving away any trade secrets, obviously, what's different about the driver in the Atrium compared to what's in the Auteur?
Yeah, so we changed the voice coil. We changed just basically all the parts of it and made the magnets stronger. So okay. In both headphones, the new driver will have stronger magnets, which will be N52 instead of, I believe, N50, so barely stronger. But the biggest difference in both, and I think if you go back and look at the original Auteur driver, to try to solve a little bit of that 1.6 kilohertz ring, we put a little adhesive ring around the driver to try to get rid of some of those breakup waves that was in the membrane. And so we changed the diaphragm material to be a little bit softer, a little bit less poly material in it. And so both drivers are a little softer out, doesn't have that ring in it. And we solved, the distortion issue completely in the Atrium driver and mostly in the Auteur Classic driver, which was just swapping out those membrane materials, getting the slightly stronger magnet, changing the rubber surround on both of them, changing the venting on them a little bit. And I did actually change and experiment with a bunch of different, I wasn't like, hey, I'm hell bent on doing a 300 ohm headphone again. It just worked out for me for biocellulose. I tried 150 ohms, I tried 200 ohms, I tried 250, I tried 80 ohms. The 300 ohms, just for me at least, biocellulose, that's the that's the voice coil that works best.
Interesting. Yeah. I think from memory we spoke about the choice of voice coils, and you generally going for 300, or so far always going for 300 ohm across the headphone range. Can you remind me and people watching, what are the potential benefits that you're getting by going to 300 ohms?
The major benefit, at least for me as like a audiophile listener, is that when you're using audiophile gear, it typically has a lot of power. Even your inexpensive amps have a lot of wattage. And usually as you ramp up the impedance of the wattage out of the amps, you lose a little bit of power. But these dynamic driver headphones only need, 90, 100 milliwatts at 300 ohms to have tons of overhead. And so it gives you more damping factor to play with. So if you're at 300 ohms, you can get more varied sounds from different amps than if you were at 50 ohms, because, a lot of tube amps will go 8 ohm out, 32 ohm out, 50 ohm out, 100 ohm out. You typically don't want to have more impedance out from the amp going into the driver. And so you can't go, you don't want to use a 100 ohm amp and a 50 ohm driver. So with 300 ohms, it lets you really pick and choose your gear and hear more what your chain is doing. Which I find to be the biggest benefit.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I know for me, reviewing some tube amps, I actually had to go out and buy what I'm wearing today, the HD6XX, because I needed a 300 ohm headphone in order to be able to properly test, say, an OTL amp. And so, yeah, that's one of the things I must say I do like about the Verites and now the Atriums, is I can plug them into anything and know that I'm going to be hearing good quality sound that's not messing with the frequency response or anything like that. But having said that, I do also notice that they still benefit from, or depending on preferences, I guess, but in my mind, they still benefit from a nice tube amp, both the Verites and the Atriums. I tend to like the most out of the bottlehead mainline over behind me, and generally running high output impedance mode as well. So has that been sort of your experience? I know you test across a lot of different amps when you design. Has that been your leaning as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of people know I love tube amps, and having the higher impedance headphone, you gotta have higher impedance if you want to use those OTL amps, because most of them are higher impedance out. And I love collecting old things like tubes and filling up all the areas that I can with tubes. And so by no means do you need, they sound great on solid state amps, but if you like the glow of tubes just as a physical thing and like OTL amps, it's a good plus.
A good match. Yep. Now, something I was going to talk to you about was that obviously I've got the Verite Opens here, and then having the Atriums come along, I know a lot of people are going to be interested to see how they compare. I've already been chatting to one channel patron who's got, I think he's got the Verite Open and closed. I know he's a big fan of your products. So, okay, there you go. You've got your Verites there, which are the same design as mine. So
you're matching. We're buddies now.
We actually are. Yep. Thanks to your wonderful refurbishing job.
Very cute, guys.
I didn't even realize this is my personal set. It's actually the exact same. Yeah.
Oh, I remember commenting on that. You did a video on your channel recently, and I said, "Is that my pair in the background that you finished refurbishing for me?" And you said, "No, they're mine, but they happen to be the same design." So, so the big question is obviously going to be for a lot of people: do I keep my Verites? Do I upgrade, sidestep? Do I have both in my collection with the Atriums? I've certainly got an opinion, which is that when I first got them in, I listened to the Atriums and the Verites side by side. My very first impression, and I want to stress that this was before any burn-in of any sort on the Atriums. I don't know if you do any burn-in in the factory at all, but when I first listened to them, I thought, I think I still like the Verites better. They still just had a little something to them. But then as I've spent more time with the Atriums, and probably as they've opened up a bit, I am now admittedly leaning towards that. They both have their benefits, but I'm now personally reaching for the Atriums. Having said that, I often go to my wife as a non-audiophile test case and say, try these on. I don't tell her anything about them. I just say, try them on and let me know what you think. And she likes the Verites better still. And that's just using the Universe pads. I've done a bit of pad rolling, and I've got my own personal preference. I love the Auteur hybrids on the Atticus, I think, on the Atrium, I should say, sound amazing. And I often go for the BE2 perforated on the Verites would be probably my potential preference. I'm still playing with what I like most there. But what I was coming back around to was, where do you see these headphones sitting? And I'm interested to hear both of your opinions on this one, because no doubt you both spent time with both headphones. What are your thoughts on when someone going to gravitate towards a Verite and when someone going to gravitate towards an Atrium?
I don't know. I think Verite is off the bat impressive just because it's so fast, and sometimes that's an attribute that grabs you immediately. Whereas the Atrium, for me, one of the attributes is just the soundstage, which is something that I find myself experiencing when I'm more immersed than something that I'm, something that's fast is something that like viscerally gets you right away, where the soundstage is something that I feel like is more enveloping when you're kind of sitting and getting used to it and hearing like how the scape sounds. So that's the immediate difference in terms of, when I reach for one over the other, what type of genre I'm going for, what the feel is. But I'll turn it over to the gentleman with more of an audiophile vocabulary.
What are your thoughts, Zach?
I think Bevin talked about soundstage and speed and stuff. And someone was asking me this earlier today on YouTube on one of our videos. And it's like, I think when you first put the headphone on, the Verite it has a more exciting tuning. It has a little more low end. It's got a little more high end. Driver has a little bit more transient ting right at the beginning of it. It's kind of, more exciting right off the bat. And I guess that's the thing, and why, and I know we'll get into this in a minute, why the patent pending damping system, I felt the need to, kind of further it, because you can tune a headphone, to a very agreeable frequency response fairly easily. So yeah, I guess that was why I thought it was important to do the Atrium damping scheme, that we ended up filing for patent pending. But it comes down to just that, the Verite is a fast, exciting headphone, and I knew, and a lot of people ask like, hey, I want a more resolving Auteur. I want an Auteur that has, a lot of these higher end technicalities. And I knew that, getting that out of a headphone that was tuned more linear and more neutral, towards what I just call it ZMF neutral, because I tell people all the time, neutral is a social term that we use, and maybe not something that we all define to sound the same.
Yep.
But the Atrium damping system, having that double cavity inside the headphone that's adjustable, it's what to me makes, after listening through time, something you may not put on and say immediately, hey, this is exciting, like you do when you put the Verite on, but through time hear the large sound stage, hear the depth that can kind of gravitate forward and back from you with the recording, and have some of those elements that are really exciting in a headphone that is tuned, pretty classically more neutral, more towards, what people refer to as the Harman curve nowadays, is what they, even though we don't, tune to that. So that was the way to kind of have a headphone that over time you start to hear those exciting things where you kind of grow into it, like an HD 650 type headphone versus something that you put on right away that's, exciting, fast, a little warm, a little brighter at some points. So.
Yeah, that makes sense, because my perception of the two is that, and I haven't actually done any formal sort of critical listening comparisons. It's just been, I've listened to one for a while, I've swapped over, listened to the other, and just been enjoying the music. But I feel like the Verite is more left to right soundstage, whereas I feel like the Atrium's giving you more of that depth, but maybe a little bit less width as a result. But I think your point, Bevin, was exactly how I've experienced it too. It's that envelopment and that engagement in the music that I find comes from the Atrium, which I don't find as much from the Verite. The Verite, like you said, is exciting, it's fast, it's resolving, but it hasn't got that level of real excitement. Real engagement in the way the Atrium does. It does its own thing, obviously, the Verite, but there's just something magic about the Atrium, I think, in that engagement and that ability to sort of sit down and almost mentally wander through the soundscape's kind of cool. So it's probably a good time to talk about two really key things I was interested in knowing more about from your perspective, Zach, which is, and whichever order, the choice of diaphragm material I think is really interesting, And then I guess hearing in your own words, and obviously, there's the write-up on the website's excellent at explaining what's going on with the Atrium, but I'm also interested sometimes when we say things, we express it differently and it makes it easier for people to grasp it, or you're able to say more than would go into marketing copy on a website. So maybe let's start with the drive. We'll work from the sort of the ear outwards. Why does biocellulose sound so good? It's just, there's something magic about it to me that I love the Auteur because it's got that certain character to it, and that same character comes through in the Atrium. What's it doing that's different to, say, a Beridium driver?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of metal drivers out there. Titanium, magnesium, beryllium. Sure, there's others. Graphene, I would say, is closer to a metal driver than. Maybe graphene is a metal. I'm actually not even sure. But
I'm not sure what it's classified as yet. I don't know.
But biocellulose, being a natural fibrous material, when you look at it, it's kind of a bunch of fibers that are melded together. Innately, the driver is not going to be as dense in the how tight things are together, and if you touch the material, you can feel that it's softer. And so us audiophiles, we want to own headphones that like the Verite and Atrium, that work together in a collection versus kind of our two versions of the same thing, better and better. And just through all the I've tested lots of materials, all the ones I just mentioned and more. And beryllium and biocellulose are two that I just keep coming back to, at least for my taste, because they're kind of the two ends of the spectrum that do the things best that I enjoy, in headphones, where the beryllium has a little bit of that, metal driver accentuation that's fast, but it doesn't get to the point where it feels so aggressive that you're going to feel tired and take the headphones off really quickly. And then biocellulose has that kind of other end. It's maybe not as exciting on the very transient front of the note, but it gives you a decay like no other material that I've ever heard, where it sounds lifelike. And, the reverb and the decay of music is the room that we're in, is the space we hear it in. It's the closest to sensing those, and that's kind of why we called it Atrium, because we're like, you can really hear the area the music was recorded in with a driver that has good decay to it. So it's kind of the two materials that do those two parts of sound the best. And that's why I've always found myself going back to each one.
Cool. No, that's good to know. I've certainly, without even realizing it until recent times, I've always been drawn towards biocellulose type designs. There's just something about them that I've always liked, and I'd never sort of thought about exactly what it was, but I think what you've described is exactly it. It gives that sense of realism to the space in the sound that I probably always err personally towards soundstage presentation a little bit more than pure detail and speed. And so that's probably also a bit of a guide for people that are trying to work out which one's right for them. Are you looking for that absolute sense of resolution and clarity and attack without being aggressive, is where the Verite is great. And then if you're after more of that soundstage experience and that engagement, but not maybe as much excitement up front, then the Atrium sits in there nicely. That's probably a really nice delineation of the two. I like that.
Yeah, a lot of people who have tried both and own both say that like the tracks that they might enjoy more in the Verite, they still enjoy in the Verite, and then the ones they weren't always sure of loving on the Verite, they love on the Atrium. And so it's good to hear, because every time I design a headphone, I really, I want it to be something that I own and I'm going to use, and that's always what I'm excited about, having a new thing as part of my headphone collection. So, and that's how I've kind of treated them, is having a nice dual option that's on the same level as the Verite to check out new music with.
Cool. No, that's great. No, I've certainly enjoyed that journey, and I look forward to doing the proper review and all of the listening tests that goes along with it, so I can really kind of understand it, because I'm loving it as a pure listening headphone, but I haven't thought about it in technical terms yet, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And
I know when I always give them the Bevin, I give her the Fiona Apple test. She always puts Fiona Apple on. What's your track?
I listen to a lot of different tracks.
But it's always Fiona.
Is there a favorite album by any chance? Which one?
Oh boy, I like the When the Pawn album, but the first album with Criminal and Shadow is a escaping me right now, but
I can see the cover, but I can't think of the name either. So yeah.
I think her music is just, it's audiophile music, and it's really, just good music in general. But you hear the Hotel California, you hear, a lot of Steely Dan.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got to pitch Fiona Apple to the audiophile. Maybe it's already known.
I don't know. Yeah, I haven't heard it at shows at all, so that's a good point. Sorry, Ben, what were you saying?
No, I think a lot of audiophiles like Fiona Apple, maybe secretly after they've checked out Hotel California a few times.
Yeah, then they duck off and listen to Fiona Apple in private or something. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's it. So let's move now into the actual Atrium system. Can you tell us in sort of layman's everyday terms what's going on in the system? When people look at the photos on the website, etc., what they'll see is there's a sort of a foam dome, if you like, over the back of the driver that sits there for. So
yeah,
if you
I'm gonna put on a screen here and just kind of show the website really quick.
Brilliant, even better. Yeah, and so if you scroll down, I think from memory when I had a look at this, there's a photo of the actual foam cup. Yeah, they're on the bottom right-hand corner there. So there's obviously this foam damping material attached to the back of the driver, and then that would sit inside the wooden housing.
Yeah.
Obviously that's more than just a random piece of foam. What's gone into the design of that, and what's it intended to do in layman's terms?
Yeah, so that foam piece, I mean, and I tried to describe that in here a little bit, is, in the past, some of our headphones, you'd either put the foam right up against the driver or right on the back of the cup. And that's kind of the traditional way, people have tuned headphones. And so instead of having it, so if this is the back of the cup and this is the driver, instead of having it right here or right here, the Atrium system allows us to, we created these foam cutting machines so that we could cut the foam at any width we want.
Oh, wow.
And then, the idea was to just create internal cavities, and you can have more than one cavity. And, in the Atrium, we ended up having the one piece of foam, but you can take not even foam, any other kind of acoustic material, and create those cavities and then radius them to how you want the, airflow to disperse out. And the reason that's important with an open headphone is that if you just create a headphone that's completely open, it causes a lot, you can make it sound really good, but the issue comes in that with the ear pads, you'd end up with a really flat ear pad, and to make it sound good, you'd have to put your ear right up against the driver to get that, bass response and frequency response you want, but you'd lose a lot of the elements that come from thicker pads. And so by having the Atrium kind of cavity there, slowing down how fast the energy is leaving the headphone, you can have more ear side pressure while having a more open headphone and recessing the driver further back in the enclosure like we have with the Atrium, while still retaining bass response, retaining a nice frequency response, and retaining that kind of physical musicality that, I think people kind of identify with ZMFs. And so that's what it allows us to do. And I mean, honestly, the way I came up with it was just kind of thinking about building acoustic guitars and other acoustic systems and how they worked and what might work on a headphone. And so it was a lot of trial and error, obviously, until seeing what worked and measuring and listening and stuff. And
that was something I was going to ask you. How much of the foam design, how many cavities you use, is there known science behind that in terms of, can you predict what's going to do what, or is it literally let's try this, let's try that, and see what actually works and start to kind of home in on what you're looking for based on trial and error?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there were no other research papers based on it or anything. It was, getting out my measurement rigs that I've collected in the last few years and measuring what measurable differences there were, but then correlating those to my subjective experiences of placing the driver where and what kind of response it gave, what it did to the frequency response, what I could hear and not. So, I mean, the science part of it is how does it affect the measurements and what you can see on the graphs, and then the non-science part is, does this actually sound good? Which the two don't always line up, so it's all journey there.
Yep. Oh, that's really cool.
For me too, to watch in Zach's process with, for example, foam, right? I don't know the first thing about foam, but apparently there are so many pores per square inch, right? So you can try foam with X many pores per square inch. You can get more or less, and you can bring those foams closer or further. So, I mean, that's just sort of more of the variables that go into this and go into the testing and measuring. For me, for a layman who doesn't know much about a material like foam, there are just so many elements there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
How much air is going through, how much affecting the sound.
Yeah, so it's a huge number of variables to think about then, isn't it? There's obviously the foam choice in the first place, but then there's the thickness of the foam and how many layers you might use of foam or other materials. How long did the process take from the time you started thinking about doing it? How long's it been?
Yeah, I mean, there's elements in the patent pending part of it that were used in other headphones. And then there's elements of this that are, new. And so it was kind of taking a lot of stuff, we've done with previous headphones and applying those parts to the new idea of, where it would be interspersed. So, I mean, the specific stuff with the Atrium probably took a year to a year and a half to figure out the finite tuning after the driver was done. But, I don't think I could have gotten there if I hadn't been doing little incremental things for the last 10, 12 years. I mean, there's definitely stuff in every headphone that goes back to when I used to mod and sell the T50s and stuff.
Right, okay, yep. So does that mean that you guys are having conversations about foam over the dinner table at night some nights, and you're going to bed dreaming of different foams in your head, Zach? Is that what it's been like?
I mean, you got to figure out what material is going to work best, and when I talk to Bevin, I just say I think I got something that's working. I don't know that I always tell her about the PPIs or what material.
I mean, it's just a whole new world, for me when, in headphone design, things are millimeter by millimeter in terms of like how close or how far from the ear, because it's so sensitive, and just the breadth of interest that we now have in materials science and just materials in general. Like every time I'm touching or interacting with something, I'm like, what is this made of? What are the properties of this thing? How could you use this differently? And I know that Zach is constantly getting samples of just anything he can find to try out. So I think that he definitely has a scientific process that is all to him. It is really based on a modern spirit of, what can I figure out here with my own two hands and my own brain? And definitely, relies on the community and known audio science. But there is a real modern spirit at ZMF.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool that it shows in the sense of this ongoing, not improvement, because it's not to suggest that it's better than the Verite, but the deliberate choice to do something a little bit different and bring a new flavour to the flagship lineup that you have, and obviously mixing up the Auteur as well. I think that's really fun for those that are fans of the brand, and I count myself among that the ability to go, oh, there's a new flavour that I can try from ZMF. This is something new and different, and you sort of, I think those that have experienced, from those that I talk to, those that have experienced your headphones certainly are excited to see what Zach come up with next. So yeah, that modest spirit I think is also appreciated in terms of knowing that it's going to be an iteration and an evolution of things we've already heard, but different enough that it makes it interesting and exciting and new. Now, that leads me to another question, and I'm not sure, I might park it because it's on my list, so we'll come back to that one about tuning and things like that, and what tunings might be in the future. But before we get there, I really want to ask your input on a particular topic, which is, I find as a reviewer, a lot of times people will hear me review a headphone and say, oh, well, if you just EQ it, it'll sound the same as X. If I've compared two similar headphones, they go, oh, just EQ it and you'll get that out of that one. My experience is you can't EQ two headphones to ever sound the same. And for example, the Verite and the Atrium, there's not a vast difference between their measurements. There are clear differences, but they're not dramatically different sounding headphones. And yet I can't imagine that there's any way you would ever EQ, say, the Verite to sound like the Atrium or vice versa. So I think you touched on some of this before, Zach, when you were talking about things like the amount of pressure at the ear and the distance from the ear and things like that. why is it that we can't EQ one headphone to sound like another?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the reason. I mean, I think the best analogy I can think of is like if you go hear the same band in two different venues, and they could be using the same equipment, they're not going to sound the same despite, the venue change. Or you could listen to the same band or the same recording in two different rooms, and that's it. It's just that cavity that the headphone is putting on your ear, when you change headphones, you're changing the room. And so like you're wearing a pair of HD650s right now, those have velour pads. There's a lot of air escaping through the pads right there. If you put on one of our headphones, even the perforated version with leather, that room suddenly with those pads, the air has started going about that room in a different way, because you changed the ear pad type. And you could definitely EQ anything to have the exact same response, but as soon as you put that leather on instead of that suede, you're never going to be able to get it to sound the same way because those materials change. And then that's just one element. Now you have the driver distance between the ear and the membrane. You have the back volume of the headphone cup. Is it open? Is it closed? You have how much earwax is in your ears that day. There's just becomes all these elements that are unreplicatable, not always through just a frequency response line. And, there are things you can see in measurements, where you look at cumulative CSDs, cumulative spectral decays, and, phase. There's other ways to measure headphones, but, for most of us who are buying them, listening to them and getting that one-on-one experience with our own head-related transfer function, and then putting in the EQ, it gets very complicated very fast, which is why I always tell everyone, if you're going to EQ, I always find the easiest way to EQ is to get one of those like shit Lokiuses, one of those analog devices, versus trying to do it on a computer where you can do it with a knob. I've always found it easier to EQ than doing it on a computer program because it gives you that kind of tactile feel. You can change from different tracks to what you like. So I know I'm going off the question a little bit.
No, it's good.
But I do think that's the answer is there's not one right way. There's no to EQ or not to EQ. It's whatever makes you as the listener happy. But trying to EQ each headphone to the same curve, it's going to be a trying experience because those variables in each headphone are so different.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the driver material, I'm guessing also, we talked about beryllium versus the biocellulose before. The behavior of that, I'm guessing, has a part to play as well in terms of that speed and attack of the driver versus the decay you talked about before. So does that stuff show up in a CSD? I don't spend much time. I take measurements that include the CSDs, but I never actually take the time to analyze them because I'm more interested just in how it sounds and less about the measurements. Does that stuff show up in a CSD in a way that you can predict it, or is it not so much?
Yeah, I mean, if there's certain things with CSD, like, they talk about the planar wall, that sometimes in the treble, the planar driver breaks up at like 5 kilohertz. You can kind of see a jagged line through there. That stuff you can hear, and especially if you signal out the ringing in that area in a certain headphone. But there's other more subtle stuff of just how fast does the CSD decay through the frequency response range. That can kind of tell you a little bit about how the decay is going to be on a headphone. So that's definitely helpful stuff to look at when you're figuring out the design of an acoustic design. But it does get to the point to where you can look at this stuff all day long. And I own the most expensive headphone measurement equipment you can, where you can look at it all day long, but you really don't know if it's going to suit what you like as a listener until you put it on, put your favorite music on. I was talking to someone the other day, I think it was Warren Chi at HeadFi, and it's true. Like every time when we have our test tracks, we were talking about Hotel California, Fiona Apple, or my playlist that has like the XX on it or whatever. And when we listen to a track we know really well, we're basically testing our own human measurement system to like, does this headphone meet the Zach Merbach, the Lachlan, the Bevin measurement rig and get me where I want to be? And that's why we listen to those same tracks, because that's our measurement device. And at the end of the day, whether it's music or podcast or whatever you listen to your headphones with, that's the ultimate measurement.
And that is interesting you say that. That's always been a challenge for me, is finding test tracks that I can rely on across any range of equipment, any headphone, that it's consistently going to actually show me not just whether I like the equipment, but whether it's actually a good piece of equipment more objectively than subjectively. Because there's tracks that I've heard on, you know, like I'll keep sticking with these. There's a track that I might listen to on the Verite and go, wow, that sounds amazing. And then I put it on the Atrium or the HD6XX up here and go, so. But there are those tracks out there that you listen to them on anything, and if it's a good piece of equipment, you're going to hear something special. But finding those tracks is hard, and I guess that's where things like Hotel California become those staples, because they generally sound great on a lot of things, but then we also will get sick of hearing them over and over and over again. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, I know I've seen you do this, they'll go to that one point in a song where they're like, I got to listen to this one part. And I mean, basically what you're doing is you're going to that part that your brain recognizes so you can measure it.
But it's probably only measuring one aspect or two or three aspects of many, many, many things that the headphone or the equipment does. So it's a challenging balance.
We could put our brains under an MRI machine or whatever and play that part of that track and see some stuff light up. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, psychoacoustic tests that you know, are still to be published that I'm sure we'll be seeing in the next coming years of, you know, why people like what they like and what all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so true. Okay, here's a big question. One of the things that immediately sparked my attention, because I've also got hidden under my desk on my little hanger here, I've got your wonderful Verite closed as well, so I'm surrounded by ZMF at the moment, which is fantastic.
Oh, yeah, we sent you one of those Koa wood sets, I think.
Is that a Koa? I was admiring the Koa this morning.
Yeah, it might be finished a little differently than the run we're doing now, but it's Koa, isn't it?
It's an early Koa, yeah.
Okay. The ones on your video today were spectacular. I'm just playing with it in the light there to see that is it chatoyance you were talking about?
Yeah, the glimmer.
The glimmer, yeah, it's really, really spectacular. But yeah, having these here, obviously my immediate thought, knowing that you've got the Verite open and then you've got the Atrium, is does Atrium have a future in closed backs as well, or is it more an open back thing?
Well, I actually have a prototype of the closed here. You know, that's the one thing everybody's been asking. This is a very early prototype of the Atrium. We don't know when I'm going to come out with this model, but I definitely as an audiophile would want to know if a company were coming out with something. I think everybody knows every company we come out with has a closed version. So I'd be remiss if you asked me this question and I said, oh, I don't know, you know. So, so yeah, I mean, I'm working on the Atrium closed. It's in a very good place and I'm excited about it. This is a teak version of it. You can kind of see the cup design's a little different. I have some tape over the vents here because this was an earlier version. I was working out some of the porting. But yeah, I don't know exactly a date of the release. You know, it's got a lot of, you know, the elements and the same idea behind it where it's not going to replicate anything that the Verite Close does. You know, Verite Close will still probably be the more fun, bassy, you know, sounding ZMF in that area, whereas this one will be a little more ZMF neutral. Okay. But yeah, I mean, you probably expect it later this year. I mean, it all depends on, you know, how the logistics go on our end and all that stuff. But there you go.
Okay, so Atrium will be a closed back thing too.
That's a passion for sound.
Exclusive.
She didn't even know I was going to do that.
You were going to say that. I was like, oh, that's a prototype. No, does not know about that.
Well, thank you for sharing it. That's very exciting that we get to share it with the rest of the community. That's very exciting.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's a passion for sound. #1 exclusive.
Love it. Thank you. So with the Auteur, moving to the Auteur Classic. So my understanding is the Auteur as it exists will be discontinued. And then the Classic will return as the new version of the Auteur with Atrium technology built into it. What will that mean for the sound? Can people expect the same sound? Is it going to be tweaked? Obviously, when I say the same sound, I mean in general frequency response characteristics type approach. Clearly, it's going to be different if it's using that damping system, but is it going to stray much from the original Auteur in its tonal character, or are you looking to keep it much the same?
Yeah, so our goal in getting the Auteur kind of to the next place was just basically to take everything we did with the Atrium and apply it to the current Auteur. And so when I was re-getting the driver made, and basically, you know, we design the drivers, we come up with the specifications, I test a bunch, you know, that are manufacturers we work with. And, you know, through the years, I've I've garnered a whole bunch of different driver manufacturers that I'll work with and see, because different manufacturers do different things we ask them best. And, we found kind of the best version of the original Auteur driver and kind of tweaked the rubber surround and the membrane a little bit, but to keep that almost exact same frequency response of the Auteur. So the frequency response of the original Auteur driver is kept. The distortion's a little less, the magnet's a little stronger, whereas the Atrium does have, a different frequency response to it, a different sound to it. It was kind of tweaked a bunch. And so it's that exact same frequency response, and then we're applying the Atrium patent pending open headphone design stuff to it, which is going to give it a little more kind of accentuated technicalities. The stage will be a little rounder, but it'll still be a more forward, headphone than the Atrium, where, you'll hear the singers a little closer, the room is a little smaller. And so it's really just kind of the original version of the Auteur, but with a few of the things we've learned in the last, 6.5 years since I finished the Auteur.
Yep.
And I think the thing that people have been asking the most that's probably worth mentioning on here is, can I apply the damping system to my old Auteur? And we haven't really decided whether we're going to be able to do that yet. We might be able to, but if we do, we want to make sure, like anything with our headphones, that it's a modular thing that can be taken on and off the headphone, because we want the user to have that end control over whether they like it or not. Because I'm well aware, you can't just throw the damping system on any of our existing headphones and have it work. They're all designed with that intent in mind. And so we have more testing. We can't promise anything on that element yet.
Yeah. Good to know that it's a possibility in the future depending on how the testing goes. So that's great. Speaking of different headphones and tuning and frequency response, one of the questions a patron asked me this when I said that I was going to be doing this interview. They didn't know what it was about. They didn't know the Atrium was coming, but I said, I'm going to be chatting to Bevin and Zach. Is there anything you want me to ask about? And one of the questions that came up was whether or not you ever see yourself departing from the ZMF sound, if you like, in terms of deliberately tuning a headphone that maybe strays outside your personal preferences, but to meet a specific target. And they weren't saying target in the sense of a Harman target, just a target curve where you say, you know what, most of my headphones are roughly this shape. I want one that's dead flat, or that's this shape, or whatever you might decide. Is that something you can see happening, or is it, I'm guessing as someone tuning the headphones, it's probably always got to come down to a level of preference and enjoyment for you. But any thoughts?
I have a thought on that. Somebody once asked me something similar about the Zach's sort of being the head designer of ZMF and the ZMF house sound and all of that, and how his perspective comes across in each thing. And we were kind of comparing it to like an artist, like Van Gogh or something, where, if you look at Sunflowers and you look at Starry Night, they're two distinct paintings, but they're just very similar. Like, you look at the brush strokes, you look at the color palette, you look at the weight of the line, and you know that it was the same artist who did those two things, even though they're very different subjects, very different things. So I think that, with Zach being the primary audio designer at ZMF, that there will always be an element where that it's his brush stroke. That I don't think, he may go through different periods where he's in a blue period and everything's very bassy, or, what have you. But I think when it sort of comes down to it, it is almost like that, like where you can walk into an art museum and you can look at a painting and you can say, I know who did that one, no matter the subject.
Yep.
So I think that sort of ZMF plays out along that way.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's, you'd say, hey, are you to stray from something you've been doing? But at the end of the day, if you're holding the brush, your hand has this angle, whatever. I don't think I could make a headphone that I didn't like. I'd be like, I have to come out with it and like how it sounds. So it's kind of like, if I like it and I release it as a headphone, then there's probably some, whatever the ZMF sound is, that's at the time, that's going to be in there somehow.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
Like, don't get
no, and it's kind of funny, this also has brought up this talk lately about people being like, hey, where's that 1,000 and under close back you've been talking about for 2 years? and which is funny because the project is called ZMF 19, which 2019 is when we started it, and that headphone is pretty much done. It's just we need the infrastructure to be able to build it, which we're still working on. But that headphone is more Harman tuned, and it's not more Harman tuned because I was like, I'm going to make a Harman tuned headphone, but it's more Harman tuned because that's what sounds best with the particular driver that we ended up going with for it, which I will say is an 80 impedance driver. Not
I remember you mentioning that. Yeah.
So we use the 300 ohm impedance driver on the membrane, and just like biocellulose works the best with, this driver material works best with an 80 ohm impedance, and so it's kind of the opposite, which is but we are looking forward. That headphone it is closer to completion at this point, and we're working on getting into more space, making sure we know how to build that headphone so that when it comes out we don't just make 50 of them and then say, well, this is really hard. We can't make enough of these or anything like that. So
our sound, or things that Zach and I tend to enjoy, are like replications of live music the way we actually experience it. Like, I'm just thinking of sometimes when you watch television on a 4K TV and you can see into someone's pores. And it's kind of interesting. You're like, wow, I never knew, they had a blackhead there. Whatever. But, and it's so engaging because it's larger than life. But, with my music, I don't often love hearing music where I'm like, that's really intense. And that's not how it sounds when I'm at a concert. Like, I do like a more natural presentation. I do like a more, that's the exact tone I hear when a guitar is strummed. So I think that our presentation will always try to sort of target that more natural acoustic kind of feel.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I remember something I have always sort of kept in my mind as a bit of a reference point. I used to work for Bang & Olufsen many years ago, and one of the things that they were very focused on was their TVs not having overly saturated colours or overly sharp contrast, still obviously being of high quality, but the point for them was it was about having an image that was natural and enjoyable, so that time after time when you watched it, it was enjoyable, it wasn't fatiguing. And then you go to a showroom and you'd look at all of the other brands on the shelves and they've all got these massive contrast and saturation to try and make them look really exciting at first glance. But then you get it home and it's not as enjoyable for an extended listening period because it's kind of overdone. And then often you've got to go and tweak settings and whatever. But I think the point is that I sort of see a lot of your headphone designs as being more that B&O type approach, which is what sounds enjoyable and realistic and lifelike, rather than necessarily having some huge treble peak which makes you go, wow, there's this tiny micro detail that I've never heard on any other piece of equipment before, which, like you say, it's interesting, but is it enjoyable in the long run? I don't always know that it is, so I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, it's kind of the thing where it's like, hey, if you're going to be listening to headphones for a long time, a lot of times I'll say try the suede or the hybrid pads, because that extra bit of softening of the sound lets your ear not get tired faster, whereas the lambskin has that more ting to the front of the transient. So it's kind of like turning the contrast down
a bit. Yep.
The vivid mode on a TV down a little bit, or whatever they call it now.
Yep, that's a good tip. I like that one. Keep that one in mind. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you think a lot of people have, you've obviously seen the comments on your website or through email and on the YouTube videos on your own channel? Is there anything that you being asked over and over again that you think it's good to share with people, that they should know about the Atrium or the Auteur Classic?
Well, one thing that I just really want to say to the audiophile community is, we really do want to make that headphone that comes in at a more affordable price point. I know that was the thing that we were talking about, and people were looking forward to that release. There are a lot of logistics that go into getting something out there and getting it out there right. So it is coming, and I know Zach covered that, but that is something on the back of my mind. I want the community to know that that's important to me and to us. And so,
it probably would be out by now if COVID didn't happen. Yeah. I mean, one of the truths of this release and everything we're doing now is that we had your 5-year plan when then COVID happens and you're working by yourself for 10 weeks, and then we had our staff working socially distanced for majority of 2020 where we weren't near them in the shop and this kind of stuff. And so it, getting caught up from that period, it took us pretty much until now in figuring out those logistics. And so the one thing it did do is it gave me a lot of time to really perfect things and do a lot of R&D that I maybe, wouldn't have done in the same manner. So I think in the end, we're a better company for having gone through the pandemic and figuring out what's the most efficient way to do everything, and hearing from everybody, what they want from us. We do care about all of our owners and what they look for out of us. And there's definitely a lot of, exciting ZMF stuff. And we can't wait to get to shows and see people in person.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys you have a lot of meets that you're able to attend in Australia, but
we don't have a lot of meets so much, but not that I'm involved in myself anyway. We used to have quite a few headphone meets here in Melbourne, but that's long ago that I'm not as involved in headphone anymore, purely because of time. I just, between work, which is not in audio, my normal work, my paid job is elsewhere. So between work and family and then the channel, finding time to be on Headfi and therefore building that community for meets is a thing of the past, unfortunately. But we do have the Melbourne International Hi-Fi shows coming up again this year. So hopefully that'll be a first chance for a long time for a lot of the community to get out there and obviously see one another and also check out some new gear. So that's going to be potentially exciting. I'm not sure if any of your... because I think you've got a few suppliers in Australia or retailers in Australia that order from you. I don't know if any of those are going to be at the Hi-Fi show or not, but fingers crossed maybe they are.
We work with Hugo at Indie Hi-Fi.
And I think actually he is going to be... I know he's doing a listening... He's doing a day or two before the show for people to go and do a listening session, listening room. So he might have some of your headphones there, I'm guessing then.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. So there's a hot tip for anyone going to the Melbourne International Hi-Fi show is allow yourself to come a bit early and check out Hugo from Indie Hi-Fi's listening room and hopefully get a chance to hear the Atriums and other headphones. I was putting the pieces together in my head then, and I'm curious, given that you're working out logistics on this sub $1,000 headphone, the fact that it requires logistics, I'm guessing that means it's a different form factor to what we're used to seeing from you, and therefore you've got to work out other manufacturing. Is that true?
I would actually say it's almost like, how do we make sure that we do everything efficiently enough the similar way? And so it's almost just tweaking the chassis so that it can be made consistently and fast, whereas everything is still, that's one of the things I want to make sure it's still wood, leather, and metal, and there may be a slight different part that's molded or something like that. I'm not sure 100% yet, but it's really the difficulty is doing the things the way we've been doing them and more similar, but being able to do it in a fast enough way so that we can have it at that price point.
Yep.
And so it really has nothing to do with the sound at this point or anything like that. And I think, when we do come out with it, people will be shockingly surprised at the sound quality and all that stuff. But yeah, it's all about sticking to the ZMF, what you expect from a ZMF, regardless of the price. Yeah.
And what you expect from us as a company in terms of our ability to,
customer service,
support you quickly, make sure your headphone is top notch. I don't, ever want to get in a situation where we're like, here you go, it's out there, and then you have a problem and you're, dissatisfied with us as a company. I want to make sure the company is, everything is in line to give you a great experience.
Yep. That's fantastic. And I think that's going to be very important to a lot of people who I know value from what I hear in terms of people's experiences that they share. It's always a positive story that I hear is, this happened and Zach and Bevin were great. They did this, and this. It's always this positive story. So I think a lot of people will really appreciate knowing that continues despite a lower price tag, that there'll still be that approach to customer service is really valuable. So that's great. We shall look forward and anticipate the release. That's great. It's
still us doing most of the customer service. We have a wonderful, staff member named Kevin who helps us out, who's a big time audiophile as well. My main guy that I, with Keith too, that we talk about audiophile stuff in the shop with, and do our best. Be nice to us.
Fantastic. I think we've covered everything off that I had. Is anything left over for you that is still sitting in the back of your mind that you wanted to share?
No,
I just wanted to thank you
Thanks,
again for,
thanks for your patience.
inviting us,
It took us so
setting
long to
us
get in
up,
headphones.
Your patience.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure. It's great being able to have these opportunities to, I know I enjoy the conversations and finding out more, but I also know from the comments that a lot of the viewers just love getting to know the people in the industry that are making the products that we all love. So the thanks is in both directions. So we appreciate it as well. Definitely. Thank you so much for your time
When I
and
hear
commitment.
the questions you have for us, I always think Lachlan is asking the questions I would ask myself.
No.
That's
You ask
good
really
question.
good questions, and I know that because I don't know the answers. I'm like, oh man, this is a Zach question. This is intense.
I think what it comes down to is I'm still first and foremost an audio and music lover. I don't consider myself an audiophile so much as a music filer. Someone said to me recently, they described themselves that way. And I think that's very true for me, is I'm someone that loves the experience of hearing the music through the gear more than the gear itself. I enjoy the gear, but it's more about hearing the music through it. So I think that's probably what drives it. And so hopefully I'm also asking the questions that most people out in the community watching these videos are also thinking, I wonder this and I wonder that. Hopefully we've, as a group here, we've answered most of those questions, hopefully for them as well. So I'm glad to hear that you like the questions. That always helps things along, that you're not going, oh God, got to answer that yet again. That's positive.
Nice work.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, let's wrap things up there. Zach, Bevin, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm sure lots of people will have enjoyed this video as well when I get it edited and out there. If people are watching this and haven't yet seen the review of the Atrium, it's either coming soon or it's already out, and go check it out. And obviously vice versa, we'll do in the Atrium review. So Zach, Bevin, thank you for your time, and I hope the Atrium launch goes as well as I'm sure it will and definitely deserves to. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lachlan.